one minister who can issue regulations in terms of that act, and that's the Minister for Cooperative Governance, Minister Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. But in terms of those regulations, the minister can authorize other ministers in the cabinet to issue directions. And so this is a double delegation of power. It's not just regulations, which are a normal type of lawmaking. We've now got directions which didn't really exist before the way we see it now. And it has wide impact in what those directions have been doing. For example, opening and closing schools being a big one.
Yes. Now, interesting you mentioned double delegation of power, but also it's about the power that the person has. And in this opinion piece, you refer to the term dictator in modern times. And this is absolutely important for us to understand, because we know that there is this view as to where this world is actually heading for. Are we looking at this absolute power that governments, that people within government would possess? And that is why this obviously raises a question. And I think just to understand this term dictator in modern times, and what does it actually mean?
I mean, I think, look, I wouldn't say that the South African government is a dictatorship. But if we don't if we don't use this moment now to say, look, it's been 10 months, we no longer have the same first sense of urgency as we did in March 2020. We don't have to make decisions anymore through a command council or through informal consultations by a ministry with certain interest groups like teacher unions, for example. It is time to move back to the constitutional framework of how laws should be made in South Africa. And if we don't, then I think we are in danger of becoming a country where laws can be made just simply on the pronouncement of a senior person in cabinet, and that is dangerous.
Yes, and I think this is where the question marks have been raised against the National Command Council in terms of the power and how much power and to what extent have they actually utilized their power. And we know that we are in a different situation. We're in an extraordinary situation, and it has required extraordinary measures in the country as far as some of these regulations go. But taking it a step too far, and I think this is where the major concern lies, Jameelah.
Yes, I completely agree with that. I also think that, the National Coronavirus Command Council might be made up of the same members of cabinet who would in any event be making key decisions in the country. And as long as that's where the consultation is happening, I think that's not a problem. But if that's not being followed up by proper processes of lawmaking, then that's where the problem arises. And I think the cabinet has wide powers to adopt regulations and set policy, etc. But what they have not been given is the power to usurp the legislative power of Parliament. And at the moment, that's what we're seeing through these directions, that a single minister, without having to take it through Parliament and get it passed through that very lengthy and complex process of legislative drafting, can change the situation in an instant. And I think the schools issue is a good example of that, because the Deputy Minister of Basic Education gives a speech on the 15th of January, says that this is a decision that has been taken by the Coronavirus Command Council, by Cabinet, in agreement with the unions, etc. That is not followed up by any piece of law in the Government Gazette until Friday, the 22nd of January. And yet every school that had opened by the 15th was effectively forced to close. And so what we have is a situation, not only are regulations taking the place of legislation, not only have we gone a step further and given ministers wide powers to make directions instead of even regulations or legislation, but now we've gotten to a point where a media briefing can allow a media briefing gets implemented as though it is law. So I think there's a big misunderstanding about the importance of gazetting regulations and even directions, if that's what we need to be using at this stage. But I would question whether the time has passed for the need for directions.
Exactly. And I think, look, you've articulated this quite in detail as far as the school example, which you have cited, Jameelah. But also when one looks at these regulations and the constitution of the country has come under the radar, it's come under scrutiny, and looking at how these regulations measure up to the constitution of a country. And we know that there have been huge question marks raised with regards to some of these regulations and how they stand up to the constitution.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, because I think we often talk a lot about what the decision is. Is it the right decision to close schools, or can the government prove that tobacco sales will increase the spread, or whatever the case is? So we focus on the substance of the decision, and that's important, and we still have to do that, obviously. But we also have to look at how those decisions are made. And we haven't spent enough time challenging law through regulation and law through directions. And that, I think, is going to be increasingly challenged during 2021, now that the immediate urgency of COVID-19, we're still in the pandemic, but we can't say anymore that we don't know what to expect, because we do.
Exactly. And I think one other issue that you raise, and this is very important, and I'm actually going to quote what you're saying. You say we are living through unprecedented times, is not as true in 2021 as it was in 2020. We now have had 10 months within which to adjust to the continued but no longer unexpected issues that surround the coronavirus pandemic. And I think this is important, because I think the key issue here is in terms of adjust. And, have we adjusted? Do we have the ability to adjust, number one, or should we be adjusting?
Yeah, look, I think in a situation like we find ourselves at the moment, there is a need for making quick decisions. And for the most part, drafting legislation is not quick. It's a lengthy process. It can take, longer than 2 years sometimes if there are a lot of amendments. So I understand the need to be able to make quick decisions. But I think that every decision at the moment is being made through that hasty set of directions or regulations. And so we do need to at least aim to get back to a proper lawmaking process. We can't keep this up indefinitely. We might need to do it for some things, like, for example, if the Minister of Health, for example, is updating sanitary requirements in public buildings or in hospitals. Those kinds of things just add, they just add to existing law. But when we're making whole new laws about what is allowed or what is criminalized, those can't be done through regulations or directions. And to continue to do so risks upturning our constitutional framework, which is very clear about how law can be made to maintain a democratic participatory model.
Well, Jameelah, we must say shukran to you. It's been a fascinating discussion and getting your analysis on where we are at this point in time. And we thank you. We say shukran to you for your time with us this morning here on Salam Media. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam, afwan.
Jameelah Omar joining us this morning. We're going to go for a quick break. We come back, we'll be talking with the Africa Muslims Agency.